Okay, so I think that video helps to.
If you miss something, there is a second.
Encore. I think that video helps to set the stage. So, as you saw, we are talking about a wine tradition that started in 1888. The Biondi Santi family most recently ended with the winemaking of Franco Biondi Santi. So, there is no better place to start this tasting today than with the 2012, which is the first wine you have, number one in your glass. This represents the last wine made by Dr. Franco Biondi Santi himself before his death, in 2013, in April, I think. So, 13, yes, April 13. So what we're going to do is we're going to start tasting through the wines together. And then throughout the course of the tasting, we'll ask Federico some questions, and we'll make this a little bit more of a fun conversation. So we had a chance to go through the bottles before bringing them out. And I think that with the 12, immediately, what kind of stands out is that this wine, we were using the word open knit. It is immediate, it is expressive, it is ready. Even though it is a young vintage of Biondi Santi, you have a little bit of the warmth here. This was a warm vintage in Tuscany, quite hot during different times of the summer. So that is one of the first things that pops up.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you to be here. I'm so sorry. I don't use to use this kind of tool. I prefer to use pump in the cellar. Well, for us it's a big pleasure to be here today and sharing an experience, a journey, because what we are going to do now is following an experience made by a man called Franco Biondi Santi, who made the history of Brunello di Montalcino. And 2012 is the last experience that Dr. Franco leave us. Has been a very challenging vintage. It's a quite warm spring, followed by a very dry, let's say, drought summer. And to date, I think is the most lower yield that we ever had in our estate. So the ratio between pomes and juice is quite high compared to the other vintages. So you can easily feel something different. And if we go through this beautiful tasting, you will discover step by step what's happening, even regarding the climate change, because we have to think about that. The climate is changing, and sometimes we forget that we are talking about nature, and what we have to do for the nature. But we are the nature. We are part of the nature. And listen, when I'm talking as an agronomist. I'm an agronomist linked to enology. And this is a big challenge that we have to face for the future. And 2012 is a wine that we have to take as an example, because it's fresh, bright acidity, low pH, low degree in alcohol, and it's 13 point. I bring with me some data because I used to forget something. I'm so sorry. It's 13.5%, and the pH is 3.2. And for Sangiovese, if you're thinking about potential in aging, you have to think about acidity. You have to think about pH. And this is a wine that you can leave in your cellar for decades. And you know, this is one of the first vintage we have managed in the cellar after Dr. Franco passed on. Oh. And for me, it's been, believe me, a nightmare. Because I was handling something bigger than me. Something that a very charismatic person manage and decide. And I have to finish his work. And this is, what you have in the glass now is something that's being emotion. And you know, when I looked at, I want to point out that that was not a advertisement for a very casual watch, Swiss-made watch because I used to use that watch, you know. But 2012 has been a real challenge for us, and that is the result.
So as we said, the first wine from a hot vintage is 2012. But again, one of the things that stands out here is acidity. And if there's one theme that you take away from in this tasting is acidity. Acidity is a natural component of Sangiovese, of course. Sangiovese is the grape of Montalcino, the grape of much of Tuscany. The clone and the the biotypes of the grape found in Montalcino are special. The Biondi Santi family did a lot of research and is known over the years for selecting the types of Sangiovese that would produce enough acidity, because from the very beginning, the idea was to find longevity, to make cellar ageable wines, which is saying a lot, because at the time, this was not necessarily, a matter of fact for all the other producers. I think that even today, Biondi Santi is one of the only estates in Italy that does a recorking program for old vintages. They take enormous care of the cellar bottles, and acidity has always been the key, the fundamental key to reading these wines from this particular estate. So despite the hot vintage in 12, we have that freshness. You also have the concentration, the richness. You feel like a little bit of a more kind of an earthy quality, a little bit of iron ore maybe, like a little bit of a rust there as well. And this is something that you'll see in the other wines, but in the 12, here we have this fresh, new, young expression. We're at the beginning of our tasting, and you get a lot of the primary fruit. Again, the fruit is a little bit of a dried cherry, a cassis, kind of smaller berries. You don't really get the big black fruits here, the big black tones. You get red tones, a little bit of purple tones, a lot of finesse, a lot of detail, a lot of earthiness. And then from the 12, we'll go over to the 10. Now, the 10 is interesting because 2010 is a vintage that everybody in Tuscany raved about. Journalists like myself raved about. 10 was a vintage that really had a almost iconic, ideal, weather patterns at the right time, rain at the right time, heat at the right time, a cool phase right before harvest to give a lot of that acidity at the end. But in tasting the 10, we found it to be a little bit not as expressive as the 12, maybe because the 12 has all that extra fleshiness and sunshine, and then the 10 is a little bit more. It's a little bit more timid. It's a little shyer. It's a little bit more restrained and whatnot. At least from our tasting, we'll see how this wine evolves in the glass. But 10 was a vintage that was textbook all around. So it's interesting to see how this wine is kind of holding back a little bit more because it needs more aging. It needs more time. It needs more time in the bottle, in the cellar. I'll give the word back to Federico for some winemaking notes.
Talking about 010, this is obviously a highly regarded vintage in Italy, especially in Montalcino. In June was quite rainy, and instead the summer has been quite hot and dry. Just few low rains during August. This led to harvest in the middle of September. You maybe know that usually in Biondi Santi we are used to harvest a little bit before the others. to try to keep the acidity, to try to keep the pH lower than the other, and keep the longevity. But 2010 to me is gorgeously pure and youthful. It needs time. It needs time to reveal the complexity of Sangiovese, because nowadays it's a little bit tight. You can maybe feel some harshness and roughness on the mouth regarding the tannins, but believe me when I told you it needs time, it needs something, because regarding the potential in aging of this wine is great. You can feel even a side or on the nose, on the mouth, it's balsamic, there's a laurel, the bay leaf that appear suddenly. And this is great because, talking about Sangiovese, talking about Brunello di Montalcino, this is something that full your heart of emotion, because it is an orchestra of nuance. And more nuance you have in your Sangiovese, more happy you are. And this is the beauty to work with a single variety. We have the chance to work with a single variety in a little spot in the middle of in the southern part of Tuscany. And believe me, making Sangiovese is a finicky guy. It's a bad guy. Sometimes I really love, and sometimes I really hate that, because it is not easy to manage. Suddenly it's going to devast your night. You don't sleep during the harvest of the day before because you are scared about mildew or rottenness. 2010 is gorgeous because it's been a classic big harvest. All the weather has been really great. Good delta in temperature at the beginning of September. So this led to harvesting a precise time and to give you this kind of wine. Nowadays it's a little bit shy, but it reveals itself the next years, I think.
Yes, it's certainly shy compared to the more exuberant 2012. Yeah. And then we go to another vintage, the 2007, which also returns to a little bit more of that heft, that power, that concentration, that depth, bigger shoulders, bigger sensorial experiences. 2007 was also a little bit warmer. 2007 is often paired with 2006 as two vintages that kind of come back to back but have kind of different personalities, both very good. 6 was a little bit tighter, more focused, more mineral-driven and fruit-driven. And 7 is a little bit, again, those broader shoulders, a little bit more fleshy, a little bit more meat on the bones and whatnot. What I find in this 7, again, Federico mentioned the balsamic notes, which is something that is so beautiful in Sangiovese, especially from Montalcino. I think in the 7, 2007, those balsamic notes, that kind of, like an aniseed, rubbing cream, those what is it called? Bengay, one of those, it has a little bit of that kind of herbal, balsamic, medicinal, tobacco-ish, yeah. But there's a warmth here too, an earthiness as well that comes back. I mean, again, we can see that this is a wine with this bigger concentration and richness.
07. 07 is the key point to me to describe 07 is the harvest. It is not obvious, but the harvest was cold. And you can find this elegance, this finesse, only in very cold and sometimes rainy vintages in Sangiovese in Montalcino. And this is a big point because, again, we are facing with another era for the future. We are going to have more hot and dry summer. But instead, '07 has been the winter, and the spring was very rainy. The summer quite warm but not too hot. And this is this delivered to the grape a very beautiful balance. If you can compare nowadays, we released last year 18. You can find the same precise tannins finesse in 18. And you know that talking about chemical parameters, '07 is unusual. The more where we have had the more extract. So again, talking about Sangiovese, talking about Brunello di Montalcino is something that you are always like that. You are always like a child that you are trying to understand what's happening. After 25 years, I always to understand what I am to do with Sangiovese. And this is the beauty of Sangiovese. And this is the powerful of Sangiovese. And again, '07 to me is maybe this vintage has not the high potential in aging. It's a good potential. You can drink in 1-2 decades, but not too much. Nowadays, it's ready to drink. It's ready to enjoy.
So for this tasting, we opened 3 bottles of each vintage, and we tasted through them all before you came in, and it was incredible because although I guess you could say there were tiny, maybe variations between bottle, they stayed quite consistent. So I'm very happy that we've been able to we can share this without too much bottle variation. But I wanted to ask Federico, I wanted to ask you a question because as you know. The Biondi Santi family ran the winery for many years and created the image and the style of wine. And then more recently, it was sold to outside investors. And there's a new team at the winery, and they've done an incredible job, with a lot of focus and concentration to maintain stylistically the parameters of Biondi Santi exactly the way they were created by Franco Biondi Santi and his family. So obviously that's got to be a challenge because you come in as a new team, you want to change things, you want to renovate, you want to put in new money. So I want to ask Federico, how did you make the bridge? How did you and your team make the winemaking bridge from what Biondi Santi was and all the wines that we are tasting and what it is today?
This is a very big question. It needs maybe an afternoon to explain that, but I will try to explain in a few minutes. Well, I had the opportunity to join Biondi Santi in 2017. And 2017 has been a very challenging year, vintage in Tuscany because it was very hot and dry. But facing with this challenge, with this kind of challenge, it's always a question of humility. You have to understand what they have did in the past. And at the beginning, I had the opportunity to taste some old vintages, and to me, has been my mind blew up because I was like, well, I have to find the right time to regarding the phenolic maturity, phenolic ripeness. You have to be so technical. Instead, in this wine, this is not a matter of only of this kind of data. You have to face with another kind of challenge. You have to face with the history. and you have to respect the history, because sometimes we forget. This is of course, Biondi Santi family wines. But from that, there's no more Biondi Santi. But we have to keep as best as we can the heritage, the legacy of Biondi Santi family. So the best way to understand how they make the wine, using their data, obviously their way to winemaking, but is understand in depth what we have in our vineyards, what we have, the differences in our vineyards. We are now in the 19 we started in 18 and 19 we started to do a very beautiful study in our terroir, because maybe you know that there is not only a small area where we produce Brunello di Montalcino. We have 5 areas, basically mainly, totally split in the northeast slopes of Montalcino Hills. And we decided to understand in depth how we study the soil. We do a very beautiful job studying the electromagnetic resistance in our soil. We delineate some plots, and we are going to understand more and more in depth what are the ingredients of these beautiful wines, because we don't want to obviously change something beautiful, something that gives emotion. What we want to understand is how they made this, and the best things is split, parcel by parcel. What did deliver this parcel instead of the other? And after, at the end of the aging, blend and give another opportunity to enjoy this wine. It is always a big challenge for us, because we are not Biondi Santi, but we take care of Biondi Santi. And it's always emotional for me as an agronomist or enology or what else. It doesn't matter who I am, because this is not the Federico Radi's wine. Will not Federico Radi's wine. Will be always Biondi Santi wine. And I don't know if I answered at your question.
I know that the mantra that you work under is evolution, not revolution, right? That is the kind of, to keep the line with the past, but not to change it too much. Thank you very much for that answer.
It's for me, it's what I'm doing usually.
So we're going on to the 1998, and I will say that some of you that maybe got a pour from the end of the bottle might have a little bit of sediment. Now, we decided not to filter the wines. We wanted to pour them without filtering, so that we give them to you as as right out of the bottle and as beautifully untouched as possible. This is one of my favorite vintages. I love the 1998. I mean, it is just gorgeous. So I love the reaction from the front row. Yes.
When I see this face, I'm happy.
It is a beauty. And here again, now you start to see the evolution of Sangiovese, the silkiness of the tannins, that acidity that kind of keeps it together. It keeps it compact and tight. And yet the fruit is still there. I mean, this is, this wine has its age. It still has a lot of expression. There's a lot of beautiful intensity. There's kind of a, like a dark currant characteristic. And again, those Sangiovese characteristics that go from flower, earthy notes and whatnot. So yeah, this was a real highlight. This is a real highlight in the tasting.
1988, no, 1988. I'm sorry, I'm Italian, so it's always I'm struggling always with the English and French and whatever you want. It's not easy for me. Well, talking about this wine, it's both generous and gentle. It's a wine that you have to drink now. It's ready to drink. I'm look to you, and I see your face, and I'm always more convinced that it's sure that it's ready to drink now. 1988, Dr. Franco gave us some notes, and not very cold winter, fresh and rainy spring, beautiful summer, beginning of September rainy, but the second half was dry. And they decided to harvest at the end of September, 21 September. So it's quite late for Biondi Santi harvest in late September. But you have to consider that at that time, talking about Tuscan wine, was not easy to keep the line straight. And maybe the rain of September led to decide the family to postpone a little bit, but obviously now it's the wine hits your palate with immediate brilliance. It's fresh, it's balanced. The tannins are well. I'm used to use it's flowing tannins. The tannins, there is a progression in tannins. And maybe this is not the huge harvest ever in Biondi Santi, but this is something that you have to enjoy now. And again, the aroma, the spicy aroma that build this intensity is amazing nowadays.
Fantastic. So from that gorgeous 1998. Now we'll talk about this a little bit at the end. But Biondi Santi has a late release program, so they release their current vintages, but they also release cellar selections. So for certain markets and whatnot. So you can actually go back and buy older vintages of Biondi Santi, and they take great care to make sure that those bottles are available to people. To just again to underline the age worthiness of the bottles. The next wine here is the 1995, and again it's funny how there are these themes that come in, and this is something that I find always to be so true, especially in Montalcino, between warmer vintages, cooler vintages, warmer vintages, and cooler vintages. I mean, it really the difference in the sensorial impact of the wine is so big. So we go to 1995. Here we have more of a kind of a balsamic, more spice, a little bit more of there's these evolved notes of leather and kind of even like a cured meat sometimes. But there's a mint, mint in there. And even kind of a wet stone or a dry stone, a mineral component. But I mean, this wine is nicely sailing into its tertiary life. It's fully tertiary, fully evolved, and fully showing this complexity of age.
Well, 95 to me is the more enigmatic wine ever in Biondi Santi history. It's mysterious to me. But, well, definitely, I want to know your opinion. 95 was so atypical for Biondi Santi. If you compare, and I want that you compare 98 and 95. 95 is atypical because they harvested later than usual. They harvested the October 3. So at the beginning of October, it's incredible for Biondi Santi. It's not usual. So this led to have a wine maybe more structured, maybe more powerful in terms of nose, in terms of notes and nuance in the mouth and the nose. But suddenly, this is not the case. You have maybe, let's say, an average alcohol degree, a very good balance in acidity. So maybe this coming from quite fresh and cold, let's say, September. They decided to postpone a little bit the harvest. And this is the beauty of Sangiovese, because it delivers something unusual, even in a very traditional estate like Biondi Santi. Here you have powerful freshness, balance, good potential in aging, and it's a wine that everybody wants to have in your cellar because it's a very good for value. It's a wine that always blew my mind because I really would like to produce a wine like that in my career in the future. It's gentle and give me emotion.
So the next wine on our docket here is the 1985. 1985, you'll see from the photo in your booklet, it represents a anniversary year. It was 100 years from
1891. We have two historical vintages in our cellar, and is 1888. We have still 2 bottles of that, and unfortunately we cannot have this day 1 bottle of 1888. Monica asked it, but it's not. Monica, it's always a hard thing to do. But I promise you that I'm going to taste as soon as possible. And 1985 is a century after 1891. You can see.
So it was a century after the release of the
after the
release.
There
So
is a seal, a red seal
Right.
that shows the century after 1891.
I mean, even in the bottling, as you notice in the 2012, there's a yellow ribbon that says Dedicato a Franco, dedicated to Franco, because that was his last vintage. You see the anniversary seal on this, the 1985. Even when you open a bottle of Biondi Santi, it's a beautiful, they have a little layer of wax above the cork and then the capsule, so that you remove the capsule and you cut through the wax and you bring out the cork. So there's that extra layer of of closure in the capsule. 1985 is kind of an iconic vintage for Italy in general, but strangely, because it was a very cold winter, it was famous because all of the olive trees in Tuscany died because of deep freeze. And the vines came out of a very difficult winter with lower yields, and went into what then turned out to be a very good spring and a good summer. Difficult at the beginning, But I think that when you taste this wine, Federico and I were commenting in the back, it's the tannins that stand out here. This is a 1985, and you get that tightness at the back, the tannins, and no matter how long this wine ages, it's just there. You feel it. There's like a tightness, a final grip at the end. I think you'll discover it as well. And that's kind of what characterizes this 1985 is that tannic grip, the power of the wine, and just this very firm expression.
It is firm, and it is coming from a very early ripening of grapes. In 1995, the wine before, I told you that they harvested in late. Instead, for this specific wine, they harvested earlier than usual. They harvested in September 7. From September 7 to September 10. So very, very, very early. And this is, you can maybe find, this is, I'm calling this wine always the forever young wine, forever young Brunello, forever young Riserva, because of the tannins. The tannins are there. The tannins hit your mouth. The tannins are, let's say, a little bit unbalanced, but they are there. You can keep your bottle in the cellar for decades, and they are still there. And it's beautiful because, to me, the nuance on the nose, it's coffee and chocolate, it's monolithic impact that open in your mouth. The mouth is firm, compact. There is bergamot, there is blackberry, there is black cherry. It's a wine that don't hit your mouth with alcohol, because the alcohol here is very, very, very low. It's 13.15%. And you can imagine what it means nowadays have a wine like that. It's beautiful. And I really want to reach that alcohol for the future. We have to face with this problem. Sangiovese don't need 14.5, 15% of alcohol. It doesn't. It is not only a question of taste or palate or whatever you want. Sangiovese, it's a blade. Sangiovese is a knife. Must be like that. Cut your tongue. It's like a Tuscan character, like me. You love it or you hate it. Sometimes more of them hate it. But it's a question of what you want. I don't know. 85 to me. We are releasing this wine this year. We are used to release some bottles every year. It's coming from our historical cellar. And 85 is a perfect match compared to 2015 that you are going to taste soon, because you understand what is happening in viticulture and in the enology. And you have to face, as a customer, as an audience, as a wine lovers, that something is going to change now. But what we want for the future, what we want in our wines, what we want to deliver, talking about Brunello Riserva, and Rosso. Well, I'm strongly linked to Tuscany. I'm a Tuscan. So I'm from the southern part, so the worst part you can imagine in Tuscany. So I'm strongly linked and bound to these characteristics. So we want to deliver these kinds of characteristics.
So next we're going to go into the 2015. I just wanted to say that we're at the top of the hour, but obviously we started late, so we're going to obviously continue. Just to let you know for scheduling purposes.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. No, we started late. So now we're doing this big jump that we are actually quite excited about, especially excited to present to you. We're going from the 1985, which is part of the old release program, to the current 2015. So we're jumping forward many decades. And Federico, how many riservas were made at the Biondi Santi estate? Like 41, no? Or how many riservas?
41.
41. So we are tasting 8 of the 41 riservas ever made. Yeah, ever made at the estate. So that's kind of an exciting thing. Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
I have a question to talk about the reservas. When is the decision made to make the reserva? What criteria? And the second question, areas like Montosoli, which are very famous, but they are lower. Will they change, or will their importance change because of climate change?
Yeah, we were going to talk
This
about
is
climate change in a second.
we are going to talk about that, but this is a very good question. I'm going to talk about what we are doing now. We are going to decide if we produce Riserva or not the year before. So last year we decided to do not produce Riserva 2017 because of several reasons that we are going to talk about next year. But they produced Riserva only in very special vintage. Let's say there's no, it's a question of health of grapes, it's a question of ripeness, it's a question of reaching the good balance between tannins and freshness. And in the past, they decided to produce only 41 times for that reason. I know that starting from the 80s, this Riserva has been made more often than usual. But even, let's say, the viticultural, from a viticultural point of view and enology point of view, is changed our world at that time. So they have been allowed to produce very good wines from in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 20s. Montosoli. I really love that. It's the lower part, northern face. It's a really small hill facing Montalcino village. And fortunately we have vineyards there. And we are lucky to have that. I don't know if it is useful to produce the Riserva in the future, but for sure it's allowed to produce very good balanced wine, because in that case, with clay soil, with very early bud burst and ripening, you can manage that to reach a perfect balance for the others. So you have Montosoli we use to reach a good balance for our Brunello and Brunello Riserva in the future. It's a very, very good place to grow Sangiovese. and just few of them, or you knows where is Montosoli, but it's a special place. It's fairly far from Montalcino village. It depends on the vintage. Sometimes it deliver a very good grape. Sometimes it's a little bit overripe. But again, we are fortunate. We are lucky to have some vineyards there, more or less 4.5 hectares. It's okay for you?
Thank you.
Okay.
So I think you've all had a chance to taste the 2015, jumping from the 1985, and now we go back into this whole new reality of a young Biondi Santi wine that is, on the market. There's so much fruit there. There's so much kind of tension and this kind of nervous quality. All of this has to relax with time, and the tannins have to come into their silkiness. But it's really fantastic to be able to see the evolution and then jump back. And then that is right before we go into the last wine, another beautiful, 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 very special bottle, the 1975, which is the last wine we have here. And we were going through this in the back, and it was just amazing because, of course, there's this tertiary component, the age component, but every time you go back to the glass, and I encourage you to kind of switch around from the different glasses you have and then go back to the 1975, you see that it kind of changes. It changes. There's a kind of a cola, again, this kind of dried spice, dried fruit. A little bit of, again, there's like I get a lot of licorice, a kind of a very, again, a medicinal quality. There's especially the Sangiovese, a pressed flower, a pressed rose, a wild rose, like a dried orange peel. We talked about bergamot before. There's an irony or rusty character again. Yeah, very charming. But there is a kind of a cola brightness to it.
It's good because now you are facing with two era of winemaking and two era of climate change. And I really want to understand from you what you thinking about that, because 2015 has been really hot and dry, especially during the summer, very heavy.
But beautiful fruit,
It's a beautiful fruit, but it's...
In the vineyard, everything was perfect. It looked like a movie.
Yeah,
It was perfect. Yeah, gorgeous fruit.
It's maybe, let's say, it's the more gastronomic and generous Brunello di Montalcino Reserve, exuberant on tasting. But let's say that this is something out of style. This is something more generous than ever. The alcohol here is more than 14.5%. On the label, you can there is 14.5. This is something more, a little bit higher, but not too much. And this is something unusual for Biondi Santi. Instead, and this is the beauty of this lineup, you have 1975. This is fresh, bright, intense, with a very deep texture. Something that, emotionally speaking, regarding Sangiovese, that I have tasted with a very good enologist, Tuscany enologist, 2 hours ago, and he says, what we have to do with Sangiovese in the future? Well, I answer, I really would like to produce this kind of wine. 2015 is very generous, it's very gastronomic. You can match this wine with several dishes, whatever in the world. There's no lack of intensity and fruity and density, But this is the style of Sangiovese we want for the future or not? This is a big question. I really would like to go to the other side. Well, 2015 has been really hot and dry. The harvest started at the end of September to reach the perfect balance regarding phenolic ripeness and maturity. You know, it's hard to say it's good or not. Sangiovese must be fresh. Sangiovese must be lower in pH. Sangiovese must be, as I told you before, like a blade. Here is more generous. It's a good wine. It's precise. I really love this wine to drink now, maybe for the next decades, 2-3 decades. But after that, what happened? Is it?
have to go to the Bordeaux tasting.
Yes, okay, so we'll wrap up then. Yeah.
What? I'm sorry.
When does it start? At 3?
Like 3, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up, guys. We have to wrap up, but before we do, sorry, we started late, but the rooms are tight and they had to change all the glasses over. We had a tasting with 10 wines before, so they changed all that over. So just to conclude, if I may, I would like to get, if anybody has to go to the Bordeaux tasting, please go ahead, and please don't worry if you have to leave. But if anybody has any questions, I'd like to take questions. But I would also like to get a sense from the room of your favorite wine of the day.
Yeah.
So I guess the best way to do this is raise your hand if your favorite wine of this tasting was either the 2012, 2010, or 2007. We have 2 hands, okay.
For what?
The favorite among those 3, yeah. If there was among those 3, and then we'll go into detail. And then if your favorite wine was from the 98, 95, or the 85, okay. And if your favorite wine was either, thank you for coming, the 15 or the 75. 15. Okay, so it looks like from this brief poll that the favorite vintages were 15, and I guess, was it 1998, I guess.